This is the story of Sumer, the place where the first cities rose, where writing on clay tablets was invented, and where civilization itself began.
One of the world's greatest experts on ancient Sumerian history spent his final days with a disturbing message. Samuel Noah Kramer believed that everything the world thought it understood about early civilization might be wrong. After decades of studying ancient clay tablets from places like Nippur, he began to question his own famous translations and the foundation of modern history books. His final words were not calm or simple, but urgent and heavy, as if he had discovered something too big to ignore. If the world truly misunderstood the first civilization, then what are we still learning wrong today? Join us to find out. The Forgotten Tablet. Deep inside the basement of the University of Pennsylvania Museum, history slept quietly beneath layers of dust, old paper, and clay. The rooms were crowded with ancient objects from a lost world. Some were tiny enough to fit on the tip of a finger. Others were large and heavy, carrying the weight of thousands of years. But among all those forgotten treasures, one small clay tablet would change everything. The Near Eastern archives of the museum were known for their endless shelves filled with ancient Sumerian tablets. Many people who worked there remembered the smell clearly. The air carried the scent of dry clay, aging paper, and time itself. It was the kind of place where silence felt alive. By the year 1988, the famous scholar Samuel Noah Kramer had spent almost 60 years inside those basement rooms. He had dedicated nearly his entire life to studying the ancient civilization of Sumer. Few people on Earth understood those old tablets the way he did. The museum held around 30,000 tablets taken from the ancient city of Nippur during excavations between the years 1889 and 1900. Kramer knew many of them by memory. He could recognize some tablets the same way people recognize old friends. That year, he returned to one particular tablet he had first translated decades earlier in 1949. The tablet came from Nippur and dated back to around 2100 BCE. It was ancient beyond imagination. The real tablet was so important that it remained on display for visitors. What Kramer held in his hands was a replica. Still, the words carved into it carried the same meaning as the original. The text described a conversation between a human being and a god about the beginning of civilization. For years, Kramer believed the meaning was simple and clear. The gods had given civilization to humanity as a gift. It matched the beliefs found in many ancient cultures. The Egyptians believed something similar. The Greeks did too. For decades, the translation fit perfectly into the accepted story of human history. Yet something about it had always troubled him. For 40 years, a quiet feeling followed him whenever he thought about the tablet. Something felt wrong. He could never fully explain it, but the feeling never disappeared. He tried to ignore it. He buried the doubt beneath years of work and scholarship. But at 91 years old, Kramer finally stopped ignoring it. According to people who were there that day, he sat with the tablet for nearly 3 hours without speaking. The room remained completely silent as he carefully turned the replica in his hands again and again. He tried to forget his earlier translation. He wanted to read the ancient Sumerian words with fresh eyes, as though he had never seen them before. Then something changed. He suddenly froze. The color drained from his face. For several long minutes, he did not speak at all. The silence inside the basement became heavy and uncomfortable. His assistant watched him carefully, waiting for an explanation. When Kramer finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He admitted he had been wrong. Not just slightly wrong, completely wrong. The discovery shocked him deeply. What he now believed the tablet actually said was far more important than a simple correction. If his new understanding was true, it would challenge decades of accepted academic work. Entire theories built by scholars across universities and museums could suddenly fall apart. This was not the kind of mistake scholars wanted to hear about. The ancient tablet no longer told the simple story everyone believed. Its meaning now pointed towards something far more unsettling, something that could force historians to rethink the origins of civilization itself. News of Kramer's discovery spread quickly through academic circles. The people who had spent years defending the old interpretation understood the danger immediately. Entire careers had been built upon those earlier beliefs. But who really was Samuel Kramer? Lost civilization brought back to life. To understand why the final discovery of Samuel Noah Kramer shocked so many people, you first need to understand the man himself. He was not simply another historian working quietly inside a museum. He was the person who helped the modern world hear the voice of an ancient civilization that had been silent for thousands of years. Kramer was born as Simcha Kramer in the small town of Yashkiv in the year 1897. His father was a Hebrew school teacher, and life was not easy for the family. During the rule of Nicholas II, violent attacks against Jewish communities spread across parts of the Russian Empire. Kramer's family escaped those dangerous conditions and traveled across the ocean to Philadelphia when he was only 8 years old. The young boy who arrived in America did not look like someone who would one day change the study of ancient history forever. For many years, his life moved without clear direction. During his 20s, he worked different jobs and searched for meaning. He taught in his father's school for a while. He also dreamed of becoming a writer. At another point, he even tried business. Nothing seemed to fit him completely. Then, when he was almost 30 years old, everything changed. He walked into a Sumerian studies class at Dropsy College. Inside that classroom, he discovered something that captured his mind completely. It was a language from a lost world, a language that had been dead for nearly 2,000 years. There were no living speakers left. There were no teachers who fully understood it. There was no complete dictionary waiting to guide him. The Sumerian language stood alone, unrelated to any known language family. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, there was no perfect translation key waiting to unlock every secret. Scholars before Kramer had only managed to understand small parts of it by comparing Sumerian writings to Akkadian texts. Ancient Babylonian scribes had left behind reference lists that helped researchers identify certain words and symbols, but most of the deeper writings remained trapped in silence. The myths, hymns, school lessons, legal records, and love songs of the ancient Sumerians were still hidden behind walls nobody could fully cross. Kramer refused to give up. Slowly, patiently, and almost painfully, he began building understanding one word at a time. He compared tablets for years, searching for repeating patterns. He studied sentence structures and symbols again and again. Every small clue mattered. Every mark pressed into clay carried meaning. It was not quick work. It took years of careful comparison and endless concentration. While many people would have walked away, Kramer kept going deeper into the mystery. Little by little, the dead language began speaking again. By the time he published his famous book, History Begins at Sumer, in 1956, he had transformed the study of ancient civilization forever. Through his translations, the modern world learned that many important parts of human civilization first appeared in Sumer. The first known writing systems, the earliest school lessons, some of the first legal codes, even some of the oldest love poems in human history. Much of what the world understood about ancient Sumer came directly from Kramer's work inside the basement archives of the University of Pennsylvania Museum. His reputation grew quickly. Whenever archaeologists discovered new tablets in different parts of the world, many were sent to Philadelphia because scholars trusted Kramer more than almost anyone else alive. He was no longer simply studying Sumer. He had become the leading voice in the field. By the time he officially retired in 1968, Sumerian literature had become a respected academic subject with its own departments, journals, and careers. Universities such as Yale University, University of Chicago, and University of Oxford were filled with scholars building careers using the translations Kramer had produced over decades of work. The field he had almost built by himself had become one of the most respected areas in ancient history research. But beneath the success, something strange slowly began to appear. Starting in the 1960s, careful readers noticed small comments hidden inside the footnotes of Kramer's academic papers. Most people ignored them because they sounded like ordinary scholarly caution. He would mention that certain Sumerian words had no true English equivalent. He would explain that some ideas resisted modern translation. He admitted that some passages still remained unclear. To other scholars, these looked like normal academic notes, but they were not normal at all. They were warning signs. Very quietly, the man who had spent his life decoding Sumerian texts had begun to suspect that something was deeply wrong. The language he thought he understood perfectly was becoming more difficult the deeper he studied it. The problem was not a single sentence or one damaged tablet. It was much bigger than that. Kramer slowly realized that entire concepts inside the Sumerian world did not fit modern thinking. Some meanings could not fully survive translation into English. Certain ideas seemed to carry layers modern scholars could barely understand. The deeper he looked, the more uncomfortable the feeling became. The hidden notes that changed everything. As the years passed, something unusual began appearing in the academic writings of Samuel Noah Kramer. At first, almost nobody noticed it. The comments were small, hidden quietly in footnotes at the bottom of long scholarly papers. Most readers skipped over them completely, but those tiny notes carried a growing sense of worry. During the 1970s, the footnotes became more common. Their tone slowly changed. What once sounded careful and professional now sounded uncertain and troubled. Kramer was no longer writing like a man fully confident in his own translations. By the 1980s, the change had become impossible to ignore. In one academic paper, Kramer admitted something shocking. The more he studied the ancient Sumerian texts, the less certain he became about what they truly meant. For a man who had spent most of his life decoding the lost language of Sumer, those words were deeply unsettling. Still, many of his colleagues dismissed his concerns. Inside universities and faculty meetings, some scholars quietly joked that Kramer had spent too many years buried in the basement archives of the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Others believed old age was making him doubtful. It was easier for them to believe the famous scholar was simply becoming tired than to accept the possibility that something much larger was wrong. But Kramer was not confused. He had discovered a serious problem hidden deep inside the structure of the Sumerian language itself. The more carefully he studied the ancient texts, the more he realized that modern scholars had been forcing Sumerian ideas into categories the Sumerians themselves may never have understood. One of the biggest problems involved the idea of religion. The Sumerian language had no clear word that truly matched the modern meaning of religion. Even stranger, the language showed no strong separation between the natural world and the supernatural world. To modern people, those ideas are usually very different, but for the Sumerians, they may not have been separate at all. Kramer realized something even more surprising. The ancient texts contained no real concept of miracles in the way modern cultures understand them. A miracle usually means something impossible breaking the normal rules of life. But the Sumerians may never have divided reality into normal and supernatural in the first place. Without a clear idea of normal, the idea of a miracle loses meaning. The deeper Kramer looked, the stranger everything became. The Sumerians also did not seem to separate spiritual life from ordinary daily life. Sacred and secular were not divided into separate worlds. Those categories simply did not exist in their language the way they exist today. Then came the discovery that disturbed Kramer most of all. For generations, scholars had translated one important Sumerian word as God. Kramer himself had used that translation for years, but now he believed the meaning was much more complicated. The word may not have described a god in the modern sense at all. Instead, it seemed closer to the idea of a great power or a fully aware presence. Something powerful and intelligent, but not necessarily a being shaped by modern religious thinking. That realization shook Kramer deeply. In a 1987 interview, he admitted something that should have shocked the academic world. He explained that when he translated Sumerian texts about the creation of the world, he used familiar English words like creation and world because they were the closest terms available. But he no longer believed the Sumerians understood those ideas the same way modern people do. He feared they may have been describing something completely different. According to published notes from the interview, Kramer looked haunted as he spoke. After spending 50 years translating ancient texts, he now believed he may have spent much of his life placing Sumerian ideas inside modern categories the Sumerians themselves would never have recognized. It was a painful realization. The scholar who had helped the modern world understand ancient Sumer was beginning to fear that the understanding itself might be incomplete. Still, The footnotes and interviews were only the beginning. The true turning point waited quietly inside a storage drawer beneath Philadelphia. It was the old tablet from Nippur that Kramer had first translated in 1949. For 40 years, something about it had continued to trouble him. The feeling never disappeared. Then, in 1988, sitting alone with the tablet once again, Kramer finally understood what had been wrong all along. What was that? Let's find out. The translation that turned history upside down. Back in 1949, Samuel Noah Kramer believed he had fully understood the ancient tablet from Nippur. His translation described a God-giving civilization to humanity as a gift. The meaning seemed simple, clean, and familiar. It matched the stories found in many ancient cultures. It also fit perfectly with the ideas most scholars already believed. Every important word seemed to support that reading. The word translated as gift supported the story. The word translated as human supported the story. The word translated as God supported the story. Everything appeared correct. But in 1988, after staring at the tablet once again inside the basement archives of the University of Pennsylvania Museum, Kramer suddenly realized the problem was not the words themselves. The problem was the way he had locked them together. The Sumerian language allowed meanings far more complex than he first believed. The word he had translated as gift could also mean awakening or remembering. The word he had translated as human could also mean sleeping one or unaware one. Even the word translated as God could mean fully conscious being or aware power. When Kramer reread the tablet using those meanings, the entire message changed. The text no longer described gods handing civilization to helpless humans. Instead, it suggested civilization appeared when human beings awakened to abilities they already carried inside themselves. Even more unsettling, the beings called gods may not have been gods in the modern sense at all. They may have represented states of awareness, deeper forms of consciousness, or ways of understanding reality that the modern world no longer recognizes. This was not a small correction. It completely reversed the meaning of the text. Kramer soon realized the problem reached far beyond a single tablet. Over the following weeks, he returned to many of the translations that had made him famous over more than 60 years of work. Again and again, he found the same issue waiting for him. He had unknowingly forced modern ideas onto ancient Sumerian thought. The translations had reflected what made sense to a 20th century academic mind, not necessarily what the Sumerian language truly expressed. Disturbed by the discovery, Kramer shared his concerns with respected scholars, including William Hallow at Yale University and Miguel Civil at the University of Chicago. The reaction was immediate. The possibility frightened them. If Kramer was correct, decades of scholarship built upon his earlier translations could suddenly become uncertain. Entire careers, books, and academic studies rested upon those foundations. Yet instead of debating the translation itself, many simply dismissed his fears. The final warning: Samuel Noah Kramer passed on November 26, 1990, at the age of 93. Across the academic world, he was celebrated as one of the greatest experts on ancient Sumerian civilization. Newspapers praised his achievements, universities honored him, and historians recognized him as the man who helped bring one of the oldest civilizations in human history back into the modern world. His obituary in the New York Times spoke about his long career, his famous books, and the respect he earned from universities across different continents. But something important was missing. There was no mention of the doubts that haunted him during the final years of his life. There was no discussion of the painful realization that the field he helped create might have been built upon misunderstandings of the Sumerian language itself. The man who spent decades shaping the modern understanding of Sumer had passed on, believing many of his own translations were deeply flawed. During his final months, Kramer gave interviews explaining his concerns. According to people who were present, those interviews were recorded on film. Yet after his death, the footage was never widely released. Researchers familiar with the archives of the University of Pennsylvania Museum later claimed the recordings quietly disappeared into storage. They were not included in memorial projects. They were not added to official retrospectives. Most scholars never saw them. Instead, the academic world continued moving forward using Kramer's earlier work. His original translations remained inside textbooks. University courses across the world continued teaching Sumerian history, through the framework he had created years earlier. The system stayed exactly as it was. The reason was simple. Accepting Kramer's final conclusions would have forced entire institutions to question the foundations beneath their own work. Historians, museums, professors, and graduate students had spent decades building careers on interpretations connected directly to Kramer's translations. From classrooms in Philadelphia to museums in London, Berlin, and Baghdad, displays and history lessons relied on the structure he had built. If Kramer was right, then much of that work might need to be reconsidered. That kind of change is difficult for any academic field to accept. The scholars who dismissed Kramer, including William Hello and Miguel Civil, were not necessarily acting with cruelty. They were protecting a system that had shaped their entire professional lives. Admitting the foundation might be wrong carried enormous consequences. Ignoring one elderly scholar nearing the end of his life was easier than rebuilding decades of accepted history. But Kramer's doubts did not stop with translation problems alone. It was much more than expected. Stick around. The final message. In the final weeks before Samuel Noah Kramer passed on, he gave an interview that few people ever heard. According to those who were present, his voice sounded weak and tired, almost disappearing at times, but his thoughts were clear. After spending most of his life studying the ancient civilization of Sumer, Kramer believed he had discovered something much larger than a translation mistake. He believed modern people might completely misunderstand how the Sumerians experienced reality itself. During the interview, Kramer began by speaking about mathematics. The ancient Sumerians used a base 60 number system thousands of years ago. Even today, the modern world still uses parts of that system when measuring time and angles. 60 seconds make a minute. 60 minutes make an hour. Circles are divided into 360 degrees. Most historians explained this very simply. The number 60 was useful because it could be divided evenly in many different ways. It worked well for calculations and measurements. But Kramer no longer believed that explanation was enough. He wondered if the Sumerians did not choose base 60 because it was convenient. Instead, he believed it might have reflected the way they naturally experienced numerical relationships. Perhaps their minds understood quantity differently from modern people. Perhaps the number 60 felt natural to them because of how they perceived the world itself. Then Kramer spoke about astronomy. The ancient Sumerians created star charts with remarkable accuracy. Their records of planetary movement remained useful for thousands of years. Even during the Renaissance, some European astronomers still relied on astronomical data first recorded in ancient Mesopotamia. Most scholars explained this through long periods of patient observation, passed down through generations. Again, Kramer asked a different question. What if the Sumerians were not simply observing the stars? What if they experienced patterns in nature more directly than modern humans do? What if they understood movement, cycles, and relationships in ways the modern mind can no longer easily access? The deeper Kramer looked into Sumerian civilization, the stranger the pattern became. Around 4,500 BCE, highly advanced systems suddenly appeared in the archaeological record. Irrigation networks, organized agriculture, bronze tools, city planning, and enormous temple structures known as ziggurats seemed to emerge with surprising speed. Modern historians usually describe this as a period of rapid innovation. But Kramer wondered if something else had happened. Perhaps those solutions were not invented slowly through trial and error. Perhaps they became obvious to minds that experienced reality differently. To the Sumerians, certain patterns and structures may have seemed self-evident in ways modern people no longer understand. Then Kramer reached the idea that frightened many of his colleagues most. He explained that the later Sumerian tablets felt different from the earlier ones. The civilization began collapsing around 2100 BCE as the Akkadian Empire absorbed more of the region. During that period, the writings changed. The later texts sounded more practical and ordinary. They focused less on larger cosmic ideas and more on daily concerns. To Kramer, it felt as though something deeper than politics was disappearing. It was almost as if the civilization itself was losing a certain kind of awareness. The early Sumerians seemed to think differently from their descendants. Kramer believed later generations may no longer have fully understood the ideas of their own ancestors. He also pointed toward the famous Weld-Blundell prism, preserved inside the Ashmolean Museum. The prism contains the Sumerian king list, which records rulers from ancient times. The earliest kings were said to reign for tens of thousands of years. Later kings had ordinary human lifespans. Most historians viewed this as mythology slowly becoming real history. But Kramer believed the change may have reflected something else entirely. He wondered if the earliest Sumerians experienced time itself differently. Perhaps the meaning of rule, life, and existence changed as human consciousness changed. In the interview, Kramer finally spoke the idea few scholars were willing to follow. He believed the collapse of Sumer was not only political or military. He believed it was a collapse of consciousness. Something about the way the Sumerians experienced reality may have changed. Once that change happened, the civilization could no longer maintain the extraordinary systems it had created. Kramer then made one final and haunting observation. Modern humanity, he believed, lives on the opposite side of that change. We are descendants of people whose understanding of reality slowly became narrower and more limited over time. Because of that, we may no longer fully understand the ancient texts left behind by civilizations like Sumer. According to those who witnessed the interview, the room became silent after Kramer spoke. The old scholar looked down quietly at his hands, carrying the weight of a lifetime spent decoding a lost world. The ancient story still taught in classrooms. After Samuel Noah Kramer passed on in November of 1990, the academic world continued moving forward almost as if nothing had happened. Conferences continued. Universities kept teaching the same lessons. New history textbooks were printed using the same translations Kramer himself had started questioning during the final years of his life. The system never stopped. The scholars who dismissed Kramer's late discoveries continued teaching students, publishing books, and building careers using the very framework he believed was deeply flawed. The man who helped shape the modern understanding of ancient Sumer passed on, believing much of that understanding may have been wrong. Yet the world carried on, repeating it. Even today, several mysteries surrounding Kramer's final years remain unresolved. The first mystery involves the filmed interviews. According to people familiar with the archives of the University of Pennsylvania Museum, recordings from Kramer's final interviews still exist in some form. These interviews reportedly captured his last thoughts about the Sumerian civilization and the mistakes he believed scholars had made for decades. Yet, those recordings have never become widely available. They were not included in major academic retrospectives. They were not openly released to researchers around the world. The most detailed explanation of what one of history's greatest Sumerian scholars believed he had misunderstood remains hidden from public view. The second unresolved issue involves the reinterpretation of the Sumerian texts themselves. A small number of modern researchers working in areas connected to consciousness studies and cognitive anthropology have shown interest in Kramer's late ideas. Some have attempted to re-examine ancient Sumerian writings using the perspective Kramer developed near the end of his life. But this work has remained outside mainstream academic study. According to scholars who explored these questions, the resistance is not always about lack of evidence. In many cases, the problem is much larger. Entire academic careers were built upon the earlier translations and interpretations Kramer helped establish. Professors earned positions teaching those ideas. Graduate students spent years writing dissertations based on them. Museums designed exhibitions around them. Textbooks repeated them for generations. If Kramer's final conclusions were taken seriously, many institutions would face the painful task of rebuilding foundations that had existed for decades. That kind of change rarely happens easily. Then there is the third and perhaps biggest mystery of all, the tablets themselves. Across museums and universities around the world, around 100,000 Sumerian clay tablets still exist. Many are stored quietly inside archives, drawers, and basement collections far from public view. According to estimates from Near Eastern Studies departments, fewer than half of those tablets have ever been translated. And the translations that do exist were mostly created using the same interpretive framework Kramer later questioned. That means thousands of ancient texts may still be waiting for someone willing to approach them differently. The tablets remain inside museums in cities like Philadelphia, London, Berlin, and Baghdad. Visitors walk past them every day without realizing the debate quietly surrounding their meaning. The labels beside those artifacts still explain Sumerian civilization through categories Kramer eventually believed were mistaken. And so the same story continues being taught in classrooms across the world. Students still learn about the birth of civilization using interpretations Kramer himself tried to challenge near the end of his life. Most of them never hear about the doubts that haunted him during those final years. Yet somewhere inside museum archives, ancient clay tablets still wait silently. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.